My name is Corinne, and I was 32 years old the night my son stood on our front porch in his winter coat at 8:30, hockey bag at his feet, watching his grandmother load the trunk of her Camry like she had somewhere permanent to be. Barrett saw it first on the camera app, pulled to the curb 2 blocks from home, and for 3 full seconds he didn't say anything at all. Then he said 5 quiet words. "Turn around. She's taking him." We had left 90 minutes earlier for a dinner we'd been planning for 3 weeks. By the time we came back down our own street, my son was already buckled in the back seat of Dorothy's car, and the front door of our house was standing open behind him like it had been waiting for us to come home and find out what we'd missed. What Dorothy never understood was that Barrett had upgraded our home security system the previous spring and never mentioned it to her. And the camera she thought she'd been avoiding for months had been recording everything. Welcome to Mr. Nathaniel Stories. This is where we share true stories about the moments that test a family and the quiet, stubborn strength it takes to hold it together. If this one speaks to you, leave a comment below and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I want to start with how ordinary that Thursday felt, because ordinary was the whole point. Barrett and I had been married for 6 years. We lived in a neighborhood just east of Hamilton, in a semi-detached with a narrow backyard and a driveway that needed repaving. Barrett was an electrician by trade, and the kind of person who could not walk through a house without mentally rewiring it. The smart home system was his ongoing project: doorbell camera, 2 interior cameras, everything talking to one app on his phone. He checked it the way other people checked the weather, reflexively, at odd hours, just because the habit had set in. Our son Caden was 8 that winter. He was the kind of kid who organized his hockey cards by team and then by year and got genuinely annoyed if you mixed them up. He had Barrett's dark eyes and my grandmother's stubbornness, and he loved his dad in that loud, uncomplicated way boys that age do. He could spend an entire Saturday in the driveway with a stick and a puck. He didn't ask for much. He never had. Barrett's father, Bernard, had passed away from a heart attack 2 winters before. It had been fast and it had been brutal, and it had left Dorothy at 64 with a house in Ancaster that suddenly felt very large, and a life she hadn't fully planned for. She'd worked at a daycare for almost 30 years before retiring. She knew children, she was good with them. Caden loved her, and she loved him back in a way that had always seemed straightforward to me. After Bernard died, she started coming around more, which made sense, which felt like the right thing. She'd bring soup. She'd pick Caden up from school on days Barrett and I both had full shifts. She started sitting for us regularly every couple of weeks, and I told myself we were lucky. Not everybody has family who wants to be that involved. That sentence. I used it for nearly a year. I used it to talk myself past everything I noticed and let slide. The override started the way it always seems to. So gently you could convince yourself it wasn't happening. She corrected his diet in front of us at Sunday dinner. She told him, in that warm, matter-of-fact voice of hers, that the lunches I was packing had too much processed food, that she'd read something about it, that she only mentioned it because she cared. She started coming to the house without calling first. "Just dropping by," she said. She happened to be in the area. And once, when I came home from a night shift and found her already in my kitchen, making Caden's breakfast, she'd let herself in with the spare key we'd given her for emergencies. I stood in my own doorway for a moment too long, and she said, cheerfully, that she'd known I'd be tired. She was only trying to help. I never asked for the key back. In October, she started picking Caden up from school on Tuesdays, even on weeks I hadn't mentioned needing help. She'd just be there when I arrived at 3:15, the 2 of them already in her car, Caden eating a granola bar and not seeming bothered by it. When I mentioned, carefully, that I would have appreciated a heads up, she gave me a look I knew from Barrett's childhood photographs. Patient. "Slightly sorry for me. He was hungry and you were working," she said. I didn't see the harm in it. She also said this to me more than once over those months, always gently. I raised a good man. I know what a child needs. Barrett didn't turn out so badly, did he? I used to smile when she said it. It took me a long time to hear the other thing underneath it. Then in November, she took on a part-time volunteer position at a childcare center in Dundas. She wore it like a credential from the first day. She started referencing it constantly. "I'm around children all day," she'd say. "I notice things parents sometimes miss." She said it at dinner. She said it at Caden's hockey games. She said it to her book club friends when they asked how she was keeping busy. "I work with children now. I can tell when something isn't quite right at home." I registered it and filed it away somewhere I couldn't find again. The first thing I should have paid attention to and didn't. Caden started drawing houses, not ours. Hers. He drew the same house over and over. 2 stories, a porch with a swing, a separate garage. His teacher sent home a note in late January, saying he seemed a little withdrawn lately, quieter than usual, and that he'd been drawing the same image repeatedly in free time. "Nothing alarming," the note said. "Just wanted to make sure everything was okay at home." I stuck it to the fridge and thought, he misses his grandpa. It made enough sense that I stopped thinking about it. Then there was the tablet. I found it in his backpack one afternoon, a cheap Android in a bright yellow case, tucked under his library book like he'd been careful about where he put it. I asked him about it and he looked immediately at the floor. "Grandma gave it to me," he said it quickly. "It's just for talking to her." I told myself I'd ask her about it. I meant to. The week moved on and I didn't. There was an afternoon in February that I have gone back to many times since. I sat down next to Caden on the couch while he was watching TV, and out of nowhere he looked over at me and asked, in a quiet, careful way, "Mom, does working nights mean you don't want to be home with me?" I laughed, because the question didn't make sense. "Of course not," I told him. "I work nights so we can afford the house. You know that." He looked at the TV. "Grandma says when you work that much, it means something is wrong." I said that's not true, she's just worried, and I went to refill my coffee and told myself it was nothing. He was 8. He repeated things without understanding them. I have stood in that kitchen 1,000 times in my memory since, holding a mug that never gets warm, hoping that one of those times I'll finally hear his question the way I should have heard it. The dinner was Barrett's idea, and he'd made the reservation weeks in advance at a place downtown with proper tablecloths and a wine list. We'd barely sat down together for a meal in months that wasn't eaten in 10 minutes between shifts. We deserved one proper night. Dorothy offered to sit. She always offered now. It had become a standing arrangement, and she arrived at 5:30 with a smile and a tote bag and immediately began steering us toward the door. "Take your time," she said. "I've got everything covered." There were small things I noticed on the way out that I turned into kindness. Caden was in his pajamas already, though it was early. She'd fed him, though I'd left food in the fridge. His jacket was by the door. He hugged me goodbye and held on a half-second longer than usual, and when I looked at his face, he was watching Dorothy instead of me. He looked the way you look at someone when you're waiting for a signal. I buckled my seatbelt and told myself I was doing it again. Looking for reasons to suspect a woman who had been generous and present and consistent for 2 solid years. There was something wrong with me that I couldn't just accept the help. Barrett backed out of the driveway and checked the app the way he always did. Live feed, both cameras, everything dark and quiet inside. He set the phone on the console and drove. We made it to the restaurant. We ordered. We talked about things we hadn't had space to talk about in months. We were, for about 40 minutes, just ourselves. Then Barrett's phone lit up on the table. He reached for it out of habit the way you glance at anything, and then he stopped glancing. On the small screen, our front door had opened from the inside. Not someone coming in, someone going out. Caden stepped onto the porch in his winter jacket and boots, his hockey bag over one shoulder. Behind him came Dorothy, her coat already on, keys in her hand. She did not look back at the house. I watched Barrett's face go very still. He put cash on the table without waiting for the bill, and we were out the door before I'd found my coat sleeve. I called Dorothy from the car. The phone rang once and went dead. She had ended the call. We came off the main road onto our street faster than we should have. At the end of our driveway, Barrett hit the brakes and held up his phone so I could see the live feed. Caden, buckled in the back of Dorothy's Camry, the trunk already closed, Dorothy walking around to the driver's side. "Turn around, she's taking him." I dialed 911. My hands did not feel like mine. The dispatcher stayed calm. I could not. I explained what I was watching on the camera, that my mother-in-law had been babysitting, that she was putting my 8-year-old in her car with a packed bag at nearly 9 o'clock on a school night. The dispatcher asked if the child was in immediate danger. I didn't know how to answer that. I still can't fully explain why I couldn't, except that the person in that car was someone Caden loved, someone I had trusted with our house key, someone who had been folding our laundry and signing up for school bake sales. The danger was real, and I knew it, and I could not fit it into the shape of a 911 call. "I don't know," I finally said. "That's what scares me. Please just send someone." Barrett was already out of the car. He walked to Dorothy's window and knocked on the glass, steady and quiet, and she rolled it down with the expression of someone mildly inconvenienced. "You're home early," she said. "Unlock the door," he said. "Caden gets out now." She unlocked it. She didn't argue. That was the thing I kept coming back to later. She didn't argue, which meant she'd already thought through exactly what she would say next. 2 officers arrived within minutes. They were calm in the way people become calm when they have seen too many versions of the same thing. They separated all of us gently and spoke to Dorothy apart from us. And I watched from 15 feet away as she delivered her version in a voice that was steady and warm and full of good reasons. She'd thought I had mentioned it would be fine to take Caden for the night. She'd been worried about me. She'd been quietly covering for months because she could see I was struggling and hadn't wanted to say so in front of Barrett. She said my name to those officers the way you say the name of someone you are privately, carefully worried about. One officer came and told us what we already half knew. There was no custody agreement in place. Dorothy was family with established access. Without clear evidence of intent to harm, they couldn't compel her to leave or remove anyone from the situation. They'd document the call so there was a record, and their advice, given kindly, without any pleasure in saying it, was to document everything going forward. Then Dorothy looked at the officer and said, just loud enough for me to catch every word, "She's been going through a difficult stretch. The night shifts. I've mentioned it to the family because someone needs to be paying attention to those children." I felt the ground tilt underneath me. Because I recognized that sentence, not the words exactly, but the delivery, the particular, regretful, well-practiced tone. I had not heard it only tonight. She had been saying this to people, before tonight, to people who would remember hearing it. The story she was telling that officer was not something she had invented standing in my driveway. She had been building it for months, and everyone around me had already been hearing an earlier draft. I asked her to leave. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She picked up her tote bag with the expression of someone doing me a favor by going. She walked out. Barrett had Caden inside before her car reached the end of the street. I stood in my kitchen with the hockey bag on the table and made myself breathe. Her text arrived 11 minutes later. Just wanted to make sure we were on the same page about tonight. I thought we'd spoken about the sleepover last week. Timestamp, 9:47 p.m. We had been standing in our driveway at 9:44. Barrett read it over my shoulder. "She didn't write that because she was confused," he said quietly. "She wrote it because she needs something that looks like a prior agreement." We opened the bag. Inside, 3 days of Caden's clothes, folded with unsettling neatness, his toothbrush, his favorite crackers, the yellow tablet. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a strip of tissue paper the way you'd pack something fragile. The hockey puck Bernard had given Barrett when he was 17, the one Barrett had passed to Caden on the day he was born, the one that lived on Caden's shelf between his trophies and had never, in 8 years, gone anywhere overnight. I held it in both hands. You don't pack that puck for a sleepover. Under the puck was a folder with a tab label that read, in Dorothy's careful handwriting, Concerns, Caden's home environment. Barrett sat down at the kitchen table and didn't say anything for almost a full minute. The folder was a case file, organized by date, going back to the previous August. There was a log of entries, each one short, each one written in that warm, concerned grandmother register. Corinne seemed exhausted at pickup. Caden mentioned she'd slept through his cereal, getting soggy. Noticed Caden's winter coat had a broken zipper. He said he'd been asking about it for 2 weeks. Caden appeared anxious at dinner, kept looking at the door, could not explain why. Small things. True things, some of them. The zipper had been real. I'd ordered a replacement coat and it hadn't arrived yet. These were the ordinary failures that happen in every household in the country in the middle of a February that won't end, collected here and filed like exhibits. Some lines were underlined in pencil, the ones she planned to read aloud to someone. At the back, a letter, handwritten, addressed to my darling Caden. It said, "When the time comes, you'll understand why Grandma did what she did. I promise I am doing this because I love you more than anything. Your room here is ready whenever you need it." And the last page was a list, 5 names: Barrett, my workplace, Caden school, the neighbors on both sides, their family doctor. She wasn't only building a story. She had been building a distribution list for it. It was Barrett who pulled up the camera library on his phone. He'd been sitting quietly while I worked through the folder, and when he turned the screen toward me, his expression was something I had no word for. There were more than 90 saved clips, motion-triggered, going all the way back to September. Every single one from nights Dorothy had been alone with Caden. He pressed play on the earliest one. Her voice came out of the small speaker, soft and unhurried, and it turned something in me to ice. Grandmas are special, you know. Mummies love their babies, but grandmas love without getting tired. And if Mummy ever has to go away, if she ever gets too tired to be home the way she needs to be, you come straight to me, okay? That's our special plan. Just ours. And my son's voice, small and trusting. Okay, Grandma. There were more. Dozens of them. She never raised her voice once. She knelt at his level on the floor of my living room, night after night across 8 months, and she filled him up with a careful, patient kind of fear about me that he had no tools to question because it always arrived sounding exactly like love. One clip from December. Mummies who have to work so much are sometimes sad on the inside. It doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they need help, and that's what Grandma is here for. Another, from January. Remember, if you ever feel worried about Mummy, you call me. Not Daddy, just me. Promise? I had to leave the room after that one. Barrett went through the rest alone, and when I came back, he was sitting in the same chair with his hands flat on the table. "She's been performing for a camera she thought I had disabled," he said. When I switched off the indicator light on the living room unit in September, because it was reflecting on the TV screen at night, she saw that it was dark and assumed it was off. She'd been sitting just outside the frame of the lens she knew about, angled carefully, staying out of the shot. He paused. "The microphone runs independently. It doesn't need the light." It heard the whole room every time. Then his phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. Shared user attempted to access device settings. She was trying to delete the footage. Right then, while we sat in our kitchen with her folder open on the table and her puck in my hands. Barrett had downloaded every clip 3 hours before, every recording, onto his laptop and into a cloud account she had never had any access to. Because he had known, he told me later, from the moment we saw her in the driveway that she would try. She missed by the length of a phone call. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life, and also, in a strange way, the most clear-eyed I had felt in years. Because once I understood what had been happening, the confusion fell away, and what was left underneath it was a very simple set of things that needed to be done. Barrett went to a family law lawyer the following morning. We didn't take the recordings directly to police right away. Involving investigators would mean Caden giving a statement at 8 years old about his grandmother and a folder and months of conditioning, and we made the decision together that we would protect him first. The lawyer filed for an emergency no-contact order through the Ontario courts. It was granted within the week. We took the recordings and the concern log to Caden's school. I sat down with the vice principal and the front office coordinator, and I brought everything. Dorothy's typed log with her name on every page, the printed messages from the yellow tablet, the lawyer's letter. I asked them to note in Caden's file that every concern registered against my parenting had come from a single source. A source who had, that same night, been removing my child from our home with a packed bag and a letter about his room being ready. The vice principal listened carefully. She wrote it down. The school updated his file. Then I went to see our neighbor Shelley. I brought 2 Tim Hortons coffees, and I sat at her kitchen table and told her the whole thing, beginning to end, without softening any of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. She stopped me on the driveway in November, Shelley said. She said you were having a difficult time. She asked if I would just keep an eye. Let her know if anything seemed off. She made it sound like she was worried. I watched Shelley's face as she understood, fully, what she'd said yes to. I would never have, she started. I know, I said. She asked you the way a worried person asks. You answered the way a decent neighbor does. Shelley never looked at me with that careful, gentle pity again. Barrett's Aunt Norma, his father's sister, who had always sat slightly apart from Dorothy in the family, called me in early March to say Dorothy had been in touch, asking to gather everyone and clear the air. Norma thought I should know before it happened. I told her I would come. I had been preparing for exactly this room. It was a Sunday afternoon at Norma's house. Dorothy arrived before we did, already seated at the head of the dining table, with her coat off and her hands folded, the posture of someone who had been ready for a very long time. She told her version with real tears at the right moments, and a tremor in her voice when she talked about losing Bernard, and about how hard she had tried to hold the family together in the years since. She said she loved Caden more than her own life. She said everything she had ever done had been to protect him. She looked at Barrett when she said it. She did not look at me. Norma's hand was over her mouth before Dorothy finished. I waited until she was done. I let the last of it settle, and then I set my phone on the table and pressed play. Her own voice filled the room. If Mummy ever has to go away, you come straight to me. That's our special plan. I let 8 seconds of it play. Then I stopped it. Dorothy opened her mouth. That's completely out of. I laid 3 things on the table in front of her, one at a time. The written observations from Dr. Portman, the child therapist Caden had been seeing for 3 weeks by then. Careful, measured clinical language that said what she had seen was consistent with a child who had been taught, gradually and by a trusted adult, to fear a safe parent. A page I had written out by hand with the exact words Dorothy had said to Shelley, as Shelley had given them to me. The last page of the concern log, with the 5 names listed at the bottom. I looked at Norma. I looked at Barrett's Uncle Ray, who had been sitting very still in the corner chair since we'd arrived. I'm not asking you to believe me, I said. I'm asking you to believe her own voice. Uncle Ray picked up the therapist's notes. He read them slowly, twice, his lips moving over the clinical words. His jaw tightened as he read. Norma looked at the list of 5 names. She looked at Dorothy. You put their doctor on a list, Norma said, not a question. The composure Dorothy had worn for as long as I had known her came apart in the next 10 seconds. Not gradually. All at once. I would have given that boy a more stable life than she ever could, she said. The words came out raw and fast and true, and she could not pull them back. Bernard's grandson deserved better than a mother who is never home. Nobody in the room moved. Dorothy heard herself. I watched her hear herself, and I watched her understand, from the absolute silence around the table, what she had just handed us. Not concern, not love, not help, A claim. She had been saying it to herself for months, and it had finally come out, and there was no version of context that changed what it meant. I stood up and gathered my 3 pages into a stack. "You don't get to have contact with my son," I said. "This is the last conversation we are going to have about why." At the door, Barrett stopped and turned around. He looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You could have asked to be more involved." I would have said yes. He didn't wait for her response. The no-contact order held. The school updated Caden's file and removed Dorothy's name from his emergency contacts and authorized pickup list. Her volunteer position at the childcare center in Dundas ended within the month. We provided the relevant portions of the recordings to their administration, accompanied by our lawyer's letter, and left the decision to the people whose job it was to make it. We did not have to manufacture that outcome. We only had to make the information available. Caden started seeing Dr. Portman once a week. I want to be careful about what she did and did not do, because it matters. She did not hand me a verdict to use as a weapon. She met with Caden patiently, over many weeks, in a room with good light and a basket of fidget toys by the window, and she never led him anywhere. What she told me near the end of April was careful and specific. What Caden described was consistent with a child who had been taught, gradually, by a trusted adult, to see a safe parent as unreliable. He was not damaged. He was a child who had been given incorrect information and would, with time and patience, be able to update it. She said the healing would not look like a switch flipping. She said that was normal and that it was enough. What she could not predict was the afternoon in March, when Caden climbed into my lap at the kitchen table while I was going through work emails and just sat there, the way he hadn't in over a year. He said, into my shoulder, "Dr. Portman says a secret that makes you scared isn't a real secret." I told him she was right. He thought about that for a moment. Then, "Grandma told me not to tell you about the plan. I thought I was being good." "You were being good," I said. "You were doing what an adult you trusted told you to do. That is what kids are supposed to do. The wrong was hers, not yours. Do you hear me? None of it was yours." He nodded against my shoulder and didn't let go for a long time. He drew a house in late April. I noticed it the moment he came downstairs with it, and my heart did something uncomfortable before I looked properly. But this house had both front lights on. There was a figure in the doorway, and written across the top in his careful, round printing, "Home is where Mom and Dad are." He held it out with both hands, the way you offer something you've been working on for a while. I put it on the fridge. It's still there. Barrett's family took time, the way families do. Some of them came around faster than others, and 1 or 2 of them may never fully get there, and I stopped needing all of them to in order to keep moving. Norma called in May to ask if she could take Caden to the science center for an afternoon, just the 2 of them. I said yes. He came home with a plastic solar system model and talked about it through the whole dinner without stopping once. Uncle Ray showed up one Saturday to help Barrett re-shingle the garage roof. He didn't say much about Dorothy, he just worked. Some things don't need to be said aloud to count. Barrett changed every lock, rebuilt every account, revoked every access, and installed an additional camera facing the side gate. He walked me through every setting, every login, every password, so that I would know everything our own house knew. He did it the way he did most things, without making it a speech, just doing it until it was done. I used to believe that protecting your family meant never saying no to the people inside it. That keeping the peace and keeping people safe were the same kind of work. I built years on that mistake, and I very nearly lost my son inside it. What Dorothy planted in Caden was quiet and patient, and it called itself love. And I almost didn't hear it because it whispered. It got down to his level on my own living room floor and it whispered, and that is the most dangerous kind of manipulation I have ever encountered. It never needed to raise its voice once. What I know now is this: trust is not something a person is owed because of what they share with you. A name, a bloodline, 30 years of history. It is something they build, and it can be dismantled, and you are allowed to be the one who decides when it has been. You are allowed to lock a door on family and mean it, especially on family. And you are allowed to trust the quiet, stubborn feeling that something is wrong without waiting for the whole room to agree with you before you act on it. If this story is sitting with you, if you have ever been the one told to calm down, to stop making it bigger than it is, to just be grateful, leave a comment for anyone who needs to hear that your instincts are information. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more true stories like this one, about the moments that test a family and the ordinary stubborn love it takes to come out the other side. A few weeks after everything had settled, I was washing dishes on a Tuesday evening when the doorbell camera chimed from the counter. I went cold for half a breath the way I always do, the way I suspected I would for a long time still, the way my whole body remembered a different night and a different driveway and a trunk being loaded in the dark. Then Caden came running through the kitchen in his socks, grabbed an apple off the counter without slowing down, and yelled over his shoulder that Dad's truck was in the driveway. I heard the front door open. I heard my son laugh at something Barrett said on the porch, bright and unguarded and completely himself. I dried my hands and went to meet them. The door was wide open, warm light from the hall, spilling out onto the front steps. And Barrett was kicking off his boots, and Caden was already mid-sentence about something that happened at hockey practice, fast and enthusiastic, not checking anyone's face before he said it.